Hello everyone and welcome to Phoenix Gaming. I am your host Nick Henning, and today we are coming back to do some Frosthaven. Now I know I haven't played this in a really long time, but I actually really recently decided that I wanted to pick up the game again, and so I've been playing through a 3-player campaign with my sister and my mom. It's their first time playing Frosthaven, though they are Gloomhaven experts, so it's pretty fun to run through again with a different perspective. And I picked up the Blinkblade, which I recently retired. In one of my fastest retires I've ever. But that being said, I still have plenty to say about this class. It's a class that is rated as a 4 difficulty. It looks really intimidating at first when you look at the cards, but I actually found it to be, in my opinion, easier to play than it looks like on paper. So let's dive in. All right, so as usual, let's start off by looking at the character sheet. This is a mid hit point class, and that kind of matches with what it's doing. In a lot of ways, I feel like the Blinkblade reminds me a lot of the characters that you played in Gloomhaven, in the sense that it is a character that's got solid move, solid wall-ups, some special cute stuff on the side, but mostly what it is move somewhere and hit somebody. It's just a complicated version of doing move somewhere and hit somebody when it ultimately comes down to it. It really leans into the initiative weaving that you should already be trying to be good at. Just as a brief crash course, in case you're not sure what I mean by initiative weaving, it is intentionally going late on a certain turn after the monsters have gone, so you can set up a nice attack, maybe hit them on the way through, and then going very quickly on the following turn to hopefully delete that monster so that they can't actually execute an attack on you. The Blinkblade is specifically designed for these hit and run style tactics. In fact, some of the cards are even explicitly named after this concept. And so the ability to go slow on a certain turn is exacerbated by using the slow side of your cards. And then the ability to go fast on your turn is exacerbated by the fast ability on your cards. I think it's always true that the fast cards are 30 initiative faster than the slow cards. So it's just kind of a blanket rule that your slow cards are going to be on the slower side, with your fastest slow card being a 31 or 32 if you had a 1 or 2 initiative card. I don't think it's a 1, but there is definitely a 2. You have to switch between fast and slow. You can always choose to go slow forever in this game. There's no limitation on when you can go slow, but that's generally because going fast is much better. We'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but a good rule of thumb is that attacks are +1 in fast and -1 in slow. There's way more nuances than that, but that difference of fast being roughly 2 attack better than slow is a really good rule of thumb to just say, like, how good is my turn going to be in one mode versus the other. Most fights are a lot longer than 2 turns, and 2 is the maximum number of time tokens that you can accumulate by having gone slow. So you can't just go fast, and then sort of pay slow afterwards. You're going to have to weave in the middle of most fights, which are going to last, somewhere between 4 and 6 rounds before you go into the next turn. Now, kindly, you can actually end up accruing a slow token on this character by taking a long rest. I found myself long resting on Blinkblade more than any other class that I have before, because your slow turns generally aren't going to be as good anyway. And so by taking a lot of cards that lean into that, like resetting, every time you take a long rest, getting those 2 heal, which is like usually decently good on you because you're sort of this like off tank type of character, you're going to get hit here and there. And so just being able to take that long rest and really get maximum advantage of it felt better on this character than just about any other character I've played. The other thing I'll say about going fast and slow is that, of course, the ideal situation is that when you breach into a new room, you have 2 time tokens available to you. Having a fast on your first turn of breach is really helpful, so you can charge in with a lot of move and have a lot of flexibility to do something big and sexy up front. On the other hand, you can do the initiative weave, go slow, and then go fast, but you just won't have as much mobility going into the room. So it does depend on your team composition in terms of what you're going to do there, but being able to run in and then maybe run out again, depending on if you're using a hit and run tactic style card, is something that the Blinkblade can do that really no other class is able to do. In a lot of ways, I feel like the Blinkblade plays like those assassin classes, but rather than having invisibility, you have movement instead, which means you have to pay a lot of attention to what it is that your opponents, your monsters, the AIs are doing every time you flip them for the turn. So you might end up switching your plans about what you're going to do. And a lot of times when I got asked by my Banner Spear teammate where I was going to end the turn, I said, I'll see you when it's my turn. or I can end where you need me to be, because there is a lot of mobility that this class has, particularly when you activate certain abilities along the way here. This is listed as a 5 complexity class. I think that's a little bit overstating how complicated it is. The primary complication of this class is not this fast, slow push-pull. It does require a little bit of planning, but frankly, if you played it just sort of ad hoc, you would just have some bad turns and have some good turns, and it would be okay. The real challenge of this class is just the overwhelm of information looking at the cards. But once you've played a few rounds, you're really going to get a good sense of what the cards are. If you use that rule of thumb that going fast is 2 attacks stronger than going slow and maybe 2 move better than going slow, you're going to already sort of know exactly what you're up to every turn. And so you already have a strong sense. Unsurprisingly, for a class that's based on going fast, we've got that sonic power of mobility, and we have a lot of melee ability. There's a tiny bit of ranged on here, but those are kind of funky. We see a little bit of control on here as well, support and defense in the bottom, but this class really is move somewhere and hit someone. I've organized the level 1 cards into what I would consider to be 4 main categories, and the first category here is putting the pain on people. Power Leak is one of the absolute all-stars of your level 1 cards, in my opinion. The top ability here is attack for 4, but if you're going fast, you can take a poison to attack for 4 on 2 different adjacent enemies. Now, that seems like a kind of painful cost to pay, but it's actually just really, really powerful. The ability to wipe out 2 enemies kind of in the middle or end of a fight can absolutely turn the tide of a battle. When you're going slow here, you still get to attack for 4 and muddle yourself next turn if you're planning on having an off turn, or just kind of you already are at the end of combat here. So Power Leak is good in both fast and slow mode. It doesn't seem like it's good to do attack 4 and muddle yourself, but it's a lot better than the other attacks you can trigger. And especially if you're closing out a room, this on the slow side works pretty well as in addition. The bottom here is a lost card, so I almost never end up using it, but if you need to move a gazillion spaces or move and heal your allies, that's an option that's available, but you're going to be using Power Leak for the top almost all the time anyway. Blurry Jab is a lot like Power Leak in that it is an attack 4, but this is actually even more powerful because it's also going to pack a little bit of a wounding punch on top of it. This is going to drop off a little bit later in the game, but this is pretty solid at your low levels for doing the work. You can see this sort of +1, -1 thing that I've talked about in terms of fast versus slow powers. Blurry Jab is really not all that impressive when you're going slow, just adding a muddle rather than doing sort of the default ability too. However, the bottom of Blurry Jab is also quite good. You know, it's a move 5 or it's a move 2 and adjacent enemy suffers 1 point of damage. That's really fun for knocking out your shielded enemies that are at low health or maybe are wounded by you or another ally. And so Blurry Jab is nothing really to write home about, but it is a nice solid role player that I think you're going to be happy playing, at least for the first handful of levels, and you're not really going to miss using it. Twin Strike's a little bit funky in that double attacks tend to always be good. Double attacks are better when your attack modifier deck is improved. So at the beginning, if you're starting off with Blinkblade, this isn't necessarily going to be the spiciest of cards, but as you level up and improve that quality deck, obviously those double attacks get better. On the slow side, it's an attack 1 and an attack 2, which again really is not anything too impressive. It's barely better than the attack 2 unless you have some other things that are going on there, but having some mobility in the middle of your attacks is pretty nice on the top side of Twin Strike. That being said, I found myself not using this as much as I wanted to. A lot of times I would, attack 2, move 2 somewhere kind of irrelevant, and then attack 3 the same guy anyway. It works out nicely if there are enemies who are sort of like woven in such a way that you can step onto a loot that one guy had killed, or if you're trying to set yourself up for something that you want to combo with a banner spear or something like that, if you're not using the bottom ability on your other card to move. But I found the moving in between the 2 attacks to not be as sexy as I really like. So Twin Strike, while I think it's very good on paper, for me performed a little bit less than expected. That being said, the bottom of this card is an absolute banger. Going fast and adding 3 moves, this is one of your few new ways to deal with enemies that are shielded, and you've got pretty good other attacks. So combining this with any of the two previous cards that I just talked about suddenly makes those shielded bad guys just crumple in comparison to you. Again, you also make a wind here, so there's a couple characters that combos with. And in addition, on the other side, you have a move 1, heal yourself for 2. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's pretty exciting, but a lot of times when you have these bottom heals, 2 heals, not a ton, but it's something. And moving 1 is sometimes just enough to get where you need to go, in addition to making this element here. So Twin Strike, I actually ended up playing the bottom of this card far more than I played the top, even though I've put this in the hit people category. But I would say that fast side where you're piercing people is a part of it. Temporal displacement here, you're going to look at the top of this card and say, that's not a hit me card. It's actually just a very solid loot card that gets you across rooms really quickly, particularly near the end of fights. And that's a nice niche little use for itself. Really what it's for though, and why it's in the hit people really hard category, is because of the bottom attack. This is your only bottom attack for quite a long time. It's a little bit funky in that your first attack is a ranged attack if you're going fast, and it's slightly less good of an attack if you're going slow. This is a nice card to play when you're doing that kind of weaving thing that I was talking about before. If you run up on an enemy and then you attack them, you can attack again, although it's with disadvantage because it's a ranged attack. I believe that's how it works. But you can also attack another enemy in play. You know, if you kill your your target with the top attack somewhere, and then you can like throw a dagger essentially at the another enemy that's somewhere nearby. It's just one of the few ways to do double attacking. I found myself a little bit less impressed on this card than I am generally with bottom attacks, just because I found that I wanted to be moving around a fair amount, but that is a little bit biased because I was playing with the Banner Spear in my party, and so comboing with them was definitely a part of my main decision here. You know how good bottom attacks probably are, and your mileage is going to vary based off of that. I took temporal displacement with me for a fair amount of time, but it didn't make the cut when I got to those more mid levels. This is another card that I think is really powerful at the beginning. If you can set it up, particularly in a more multiplayer, you're doing an attack 3 advantage against 2 guys. There's a lot of value to be generated there, but it's only going to come up so often, and it's going to scale off, pretty quickly as you're leveling up throughout the game. And so sap speed is solid, but it's just a role player, I think. The bottom here where you can immobilize an enemy is very fun. This combines kind of nicely with your top abilities where you immobilize them and then hit them and then move away, right? That twin strike that we just talked about a second ago, where I could like immobilize someone, smack them, move 2 spaces away, smack somebody else, can be pretty exciting. But that being said, setting this up, having the right timing for it, and then hoping that the enemy initiatives even really care about it is sort of a pain in the butt. So I found myself using this bottom far less than I wanted. Sap speed, I thought looked really good on paper, but I ended up running it not all that often, frankly. That is about it for sap speed, but I think I'll also add that I think sap speed is more important if you lack a tank in your party, so that you can do stuff like making it that your enemies just aren't able to interact with you if you're going to focus more on the control side of things. But I did not find that was my primary role while playing this class. This category is called the hit and run category, or really just the mobility category, honestly. Hit and run is very, very good. The ability to smack somebody, run away from them, get some experience, and then do something else with your bottom is very nice flexibility on the card, because this is going to just basically be a disarm on an enemy that is a melee enemy if you go before them. The initiative on this is not very good though, so you do need to pair it with something that's pretty fast on the bottom, and I find that to be actually surprisingly difficult. That being said, the difference in hit and run between the fast version and the slow version is not all that bad. 2 damage and an immobilize followed by just a basic move 2 away is not a horrible slow turn. If you're fighting things like zombies that you know are going to go slower than you, even when you're in slow mode, this might actually end up being okay as a top play. The reason that this card is really exciting though is because of the bottom ability on this card. Next 5 actions while you're fast, you get to perform a move 3 at the end of the action. This is an insane amount of additional mobility in a fight. It is a lost card, but it's going to give you 2 experience points and 15 points of movement. You're going to know the scenarios when they get set up and all the pieces that are there where you need the gazillion movement to get through. This has definitely made some scenarios where moving is a challenge an absolute joke with this class, and the mobility is absolutely insane. It is well worth it. I wouldn't put this up in the first room most of the time in those longer scenarios, but doing it after maybe your second cycle is a really nice time to get this into play, especially if you think it's a longer scenario. You're a 10 card class, so if you go to run through your 10 cards, you're down to 9 now, and then you use this as one of the cards, now you're down to 8. And that gives you just a little bit more flexibility. But of course, that's a little bit awkward in terms of the like weaving. So you might even use it after you've done your entire second rest cycle to push you through to the end of the encounter. And if you know that you're going to do this, you can also have been intentionally losing the cards that have the high mobility options on them, kept the cards that are the banger attack cards that you know you're going to be going very fast in because you have this additional move speed to do some nonsense later in the scenario. All right, enough about hit and run, which I clearly really liked. Kinetic transfer here has so many abilities on it that it looks like it's really exciting, but I ended up mostly moving this for the fact that its bottom move is a move 4 or move 3 when you're slow, which is one of your better moves when you're slow, and you get to do some damage to enemies. That's pretty great. It also has this even additional option at the bottom, which if you have an extra time token, this is a huge cost. So I don't pay it very often, but if pushing everybody 3 spaces does some nutty stuff, throwing a whole bunch of bad guys into traps or hazards or things like that, it might absolutely be worth just having an off turn. And that's a huge amount of push to have on people. You've got 4 move to do it. Like the bottom of this card alone in the right scenario can just kill a swath of enemies, and that's before you even did your top action. So I thought the bottom of kinetic transfer was amazing. The top here is some mobility, some moving, some pushing if you're going fast, or some slow mobility, a kind of mediocre ranged attack, I guess. I didn't end up using the top of this ability very much because there are so many other good top abilities already, but it certainly has its niche uses in the right scenarios, or maybe even with the right allies. The bottom, though, is just too good. It can't be discredited. Cascading reaction I took with me quite a lot, but this ended up being a little bit more disappointing than I expected. I mean, straight up at the top, or straight up the bottom, is a move 4, and this is the primary reason it was in my deck. It's also an initiative 19, which is really solid. The rider ability here of allies can add 1 to their move if they're adjacent to hex, whatever, all this like moving stuff. There's so many conditions here that like you need to be standing in the right place for them to take advantage of it. And ideally they want to do this at the beginning of the turn, but you have to go for this to work. And so you've probably moved further into the room. So for this to work, you have to kind of move next to them and stuff like that. It's just so incredibly niche. It almost never came up. I guess it's cute here and there when it works, but it really is just a move 4 at the bottom with a pretty solid, walloping attack at the top. In this past scenario, the one that I retired in, I did have a really, really great time getting to run around, hitting multiple people. I did a move, attack 3, move 3, attack 3, and then because I had that other card we were just talking about, another move 3 at the end of it. So I went all over the room, hitting everybody I wanted to, dropping wounds on folks, which is a nice use for a lost card. So great for that option. It's got a move 4. And that's really what we use it for, paired with a card that we're like happy to use later in the scenario. So it fills what a lost card is, kind of like spot to a T. These next cards are kind of the weird build-arounds. So Borrowed Time here, first of all, it's a 2 initiative card or a 32 initiative card. So it stands out for that reason alone, that just using this as a default attack 2 or move 2 on slow is going to be the fastest you're going to go. So it does have a value in that alone. The top of this, the loss that sits out there, basically says, hey, we don't care about the negative side of slow effects. There's kind of like a whole build structure around this. We've seen another ability that looked like this that I didn't really talk about because it's nice, but a lot of times it amounts to, hey, like we're gonna, do 1 extra damage or something like that this turn. On this, however, essentially does double duty every time because you are ignoring all the slow effects on all the cards that you're doing and gets you a fair amount of experience points. So there's a pretty fun build idea that's in here. The bottom of this card is a little bit funky in that when you're going slow, your allies move, but you're not moving. If you're going fast, you're definitely slowing them down, but you can go crazy amount of distance depending on the number of allies that you have. If you have summons, just goofy stuff can happen with this card. And so it ends up being really fun in that sort of way. I also think that you can use this to manipulate the allies that you have to like walk through the scenarios. Escort quests. There we go. The escort quest scenarios, which tend to be pretty frustrating for people. So you can use this to kind of manipulate that a little bit. That being said, the uses of this are either niche or strictly build around. So you're going to know exactly when you're going to want to use this. You're not going to just, I think, randomly take this with you into most scenarios. Overdrive here, I tried out the top where it's a shield while you're slow, which is pretty nice when you're low level, but frankly, when you're going slow, you don't want to be going toe-to-toe. You're setting up so that you can go toe-to-toe next turn, and just adding jump to your fast turns is not really enough the power that it is worth the loss card that comes with it. The bottom here about throwing muddles on people is certainly nice. I've used this card a handful of times while I'm already in the melee mix, particularly when my tank friend is there, to throw some muddles up on folks and just get a little bit of control advantage that way. And Overdrive is fine, but overall this was a card I ended up taking in and out and cutting a fair amount. So I think you can certainly live without it. The last couple of cards are weird role player cards, and 2 of them are X's, so you can see that's not really the focus of this character. I literally never once used the drive recharge ability of this card, but I think you already know if you watch my channel that I'm not a huge fan of lost cards for these kinds of like marginal, what I consider to be marginal effects. There is one of the I think that like accruing a whole bunch of fast tokens can lead to some fun cheeky shenanigans. You basically use this right before you breach the final room when you know that cards are not really your problem and you just want to like go ham. But I feel like in those instances, you're already kind of winning anyway. So this to me just feels like a little bit more of a win more circumstance. However, the bottom here is pretty cute. It goes at 99. So it's like you're doing a long rest if you want to ensure that you're going later in the turn, and throws a rejuvenate on you, some healing on yourself. So there's some scenarios where you'll take this and just for the ability to throw yourself some extra healing since you already have the high mobility on the top. But for me, Drive Recharge ended up being cut a fair amount of times just because I didn't ever really want to use the top ability on that card. Experimental Adjustment is one of the wackiest cards, and I think this is the card that you can point to be like, this is a 5 complexity class, because there's just so much weird stuff going on. So let's break this down a little bit. The top is hurt yourself. No matter what, you're hurting yourself. And then you're going to hurt a bunch of enemies and go invisible if you're going fast. So that's fine. Basically, you use this when you've quickly run into a room. You go at the beginning of the initiative because you're 12, ping all the bad guys in addition to some bottom ability. Might I recommend, for instance, Temporal Displacement as a really good friend to this card. So I've run into melee, I hit somebody, then I damage people for 1 and I go invisible so they can no longer hurt me. That's a really neat idea, but it's a lot of work and setup, and you do 2 damage to yourself, so I don't think it quite packs the wall up that I wanted it to. The slow side in some ways felt even more interesting, but also hard to set up. I kind of want enemies to be ringed at exactly, melee enemies to be ringed like 2 spaces away from me, so I could make it so that they couldn't move to attack and I wasted their turn. And if they're ranged or if they're in melee, at least I muddled them or something. It's okay. It's a fine control effect. It is what it is. The bottom here is really interesting though. A move 2 loot is pretty powerful, and so that does a fair amount of work just on its own. And then when you're going slow, you can do a move 4 here, which is really fascinating. It's the only card that has an additional move when you're going slow. However, you're not going to move next turn. This mechanic exists on a D&D character race, so I'm actually really familiar with this kind of concept and have used it before. And since you're the one who controls when you do this, it's actually pretty powerful. We've seen bottom abilities where you kind of are doing healing or you're maybe muddling adjacent monsters. You know exactly what you're getting in for. And so if you are planning on doing sort of an initiative weave with this, it's nice to go last, set up where you want to be, and then go really quickly next turn. The awkward part about it is that because you kind of want to go last in initiative to really get the most value out of this movement ability, it itself is not all that slow. So you need to pair it with another card that is going to go on the slower side, which I think is a little bit funky. That's the downside of the 12 being so good on this. Sands in the Hourglass is a card that I thought looked pretty bad, but I've actually used this a surprising number of times. I forget often how many enemies have shields in Frosthaven, and I had some other people in my party that were able to throw wounds up on enemies. So getting to go quickly, throw an additional wound, and do like 6 damage to people when I was at low levels actually packed a whole lot more wallop than I expected. It's guaranteed. It doesn't care about my mediocre attack modifier deck to start off the game. And so I think at low level, Sands in the Hourglass is worth a look depending on your party's composition. The bottom of this is also really, really interesting. You can do the healing for yourself and adjacent allies, which is your best sort of bottom healing ability to start off with. So that's pretty good in and of itself. But if you have an extra time token here, and you're probably going slow if you're doing this bottom ability anyway, you can use a time token to play a third card for the round, which is really good on rounds or on like cycles where you've started with an odd number of cards in your hand, so that you can most efficiently use all the cards as you're playing through. I think this is really neat and really clever. You can perform the top or bottom action of it, so you can use it to do a move that you might have absolutely needed in this instance, and there's a fair amount of flexibility that this can afford you depending on how early you do it in your turn. So Sand in the Hourglass was a card that on first glance I said, this is too complicated, this is too weird, but actually, despite the block of text at the bottom, it's basically just play another card at the cost of your speediness, and you could do something cool with it. Now, I said you might be playing the bottom here going slow so that you can get that time token back, but if you started this turn with 2 speed and you played this card, and then, I said if you're going slow, ignore me, because of course you can't use this card when you're slow. So let me make this point then, which is when you're going fast and you use this, you need to basically start the turn with 2 time tokens. But it allows you to fire off both those time tokens to have a really big turn, which is pretty exciting because everything is going fast on that turn. You can use this particularly well with initiative weaving. If I've run in, I'm in melee with someone, maybe I just experimentally adjusted, so I'm not moving this turn, throw a little bit of healing, throw 2 really nasty attack cards, and you can just absolutely razor down a bunch of enemies super quickly with this ability. It just does require the right setup. And so I like this 1-2 punch of these guys, but it's only going to work when you and your party have sort of planned that this is going to be the way that things are going to go. Level 2 is really funny. I took Reckless Augmentation, which I think is the right choice when you are leveling up from level 1, because it's a 5 attack that does also penetrate, so it's upwards of a 6 attack arguably. Yeah, you hurt yourself a little bit, but it is one of your actually amazing initiative cards. Despite the idea of you being a little time thief guy, I actually found that my initiative was not as powerful as I kind of expected, and getting a 10er in there just to make sure I was doing time thiefy stuff felt legit. The bottom here where you move 3, do damage to yourself, and throw up a ward, yeah, that's okay. But I found that I primarily was using Reckless Augmentation for the top side of the card. I'll also say that on the slow side, there are no negatives. So I used this card as a move 3 on the slow side a decent amount of times and was not disappointed with it. That being said, Systems Reboot is a crazy card, and I've thought about this card a whole bunch because it is just so interesting and weird, and I'm pretty sure that this is the right pickup if you are starting the Blinkblade at a higher level in the game. So the top here allows you to heal yourself a little bit and pick up one of your lost cards, which is kind of nice if you're transitioning from room to room. The reason I say this is better at higher levels is because you can use this to pick up your higher level cards, whereas when you are just becoming second level for the first time, using this to pick up one of your lost cards does not seem that exciting. So the ability to do this mid-scenario and swap something that you've lost that you want to get back is pretty sweet. So then the question is, well, am I going to use the bottom part of this card? And again, this is where higher level monsters are more likely to stun you than lower level monsters are. And so I think that this ability to remove all your negative conditions is much, much more beneficial as you're moving on in the game and fighting bad guys who are more likely to pile these negative conditions on you. That's pretty sweet. And then it also just does like a move 2 or a move 4 if you're going really fast. There's this funky aspect here where you can use your time token this turn to go functionally fast rather than slow. So basically the way that the bottom of this card reads says, if I went slow this turn and I spend the time token that I got, so I have netted 0 additional time tokens this turn, my other card's ability can be fast. The nice thing is that I don't need to make this decision until time comes for it. So it might be that I'm in this instance where I've played, like, let's say something like Blurry Jab, right? With the plan that I'm just going to hit some enemy that, like, had a couple hit points left, and I'm like going slow. If I hit them with 2, that's great. But then they got healed by the cleric or whatever that turn, the Algox priest or something like that. Now I can decide, well, you know what? I can spend my fast token to add 2 damage and a wound that'll essentially negate the action that just took place, and maybe will guarantee that that monster dies. And so the fact that you have this extra flexibility here is really good. I think actually between these 2 cards, System Reboot is more powerful. It's just going to pack more of a wallop as you are higher levels. Both the level 3 cards are pretty good. I think, though, that Double Time is the one that stands out to me. I complained about the level 1 card that lets you attack, move, and then attack, because I oftentimes wanted to attack the same person. This one says, yeah, go for it. Shred up the one guy and then get out of there. So it's more of a proper hit and run style card if I'm going fast. And if I'm going slow, it's an attack 2, which is like one of the better slow abilities that I can do. So Double Time is pretty solid on fast, but actually maybe even better on the slow side, which is nice because a lot of times on the slow side, I don't have exciting combat things to do. And this is really pretty exciting on the combat side. So I can use this in the middle of fighting a group of enemies to keep the pain coming. Further, this bottom ability here, the Lost card that lets my next 3 fast turns do double effects. This is a really great way to transition into the last room of the encounter. I'm, playing this before I long rest or something like that, before we breach the door. And then now I'm going to just come in and like go absolutely berserk with extra effects. This is the sort of Lost card that I can set up. I don't have to decide to do this in advance. And you'll notice that it doesn't give you any experience, but that's because generally going fast does give you experience. So it'll solve your problems in that way. Make it count is something that's going to be as good as you need it to be in your party. Healing 3 targets for 1 is mostly about removing poisons and wounds and banes on people. If your party is one that needs a little bit of additional healing, this might come into play, but this is really not your role as this class. So dipping into it sort of depends on what you're doing in terms of the top ability here. The bottom ability here, nope, I'm going the wrong way. The bottom ability here is a nice solid attack. It's a lot like our temporal displacement from the beginning, but it also just adds in some effects, whether we're going fast or slow. So again, this is a better slow version. So we're seeing these improvements to the slow side of our class at level 3, pretty much no matter what we're doing. The fast version of this, I think, is fine, but I'm more excited about the implications of what the slow side of the bottom of Make It Count does. That being said, I think that Double Time just feels like it's going to be filling in a role that I found lacking, which is what do I do on my slow turns, a little bit better than Make It Count does, which is like, I don't necessarily want to be doing a bottom attack when I have a bad initiative for the round. There's just too many things that can be volatile along the way. And when it works, it's probably a banger, but I'm worried that it won't work as much as I want it to. My camera had a hard time focusing on these, and I think there's a precision timing joke in there somewhere, but I'm not quite getting it. The top of precision timing is a build around ability. This is the thing that makes slow attacking suddenly very, very nasty, and you can do all sorts of cool stuff with this. There's basically an entire build where you're like, I don't care about going slow. In fact, maybe going slow is even better than going fast for the rest of the encounter. Yeah, you get to move a little bit faster when you're going fast too. Sure, that's fine. But it's a really fun that you can essentially do a separate build around this, and it's a viable build. So if you like the idea of making your character class, I guess the main thing I would say what this does is make your character class more consistent, because generally what you've had before is hot turns and slow turns. And this basically says every turn you're going to be a pretty solid character class. I think that is a really strong ability. But that being said, I don't like it thematically because I like the hot, slow aspect of this character class. It is something that made playing it feel a little bit different. Now I am just straight up a bruiser class when I go into that. So for me, thematically is a little bit of a whiff. Bottom of this card, also pretty solid. It's a fair amount of move if you are going slow. It's definitely move if you're going fast, with an attack woven in there. So just a nice solid role player. But the thing is that if you're taking this card, you're probably using the top ability very early in the encounter, and you just aren't going to be using the bottom ability all that much. It's a fine role player, but then you'll never use the top if you like start using the bottom. Like the later it is in the scenario, the less value you've given away. Potential Energy is an interesting card because it doesn't look like it is a fast or slow card because it has no fast or slow text on it, but it is actually a slow card. The whole point of this is to, on your slow turn, actually have a good attack. So probably what you're doing is when you have one time token, you go slow, get a time token, and now this is an attack 4 that gives you an experience point. That's solid. It's a solid role player. It can also help you move fast if you want to do that instead. So you can play this along with some other card and really get to decide at the last minute whether you want to move for or fight for. I think the thing that's interesting about this is that it really does have that specific use case. I am at one time token. I want to go slow next turn. So the following 2 turns, I can go fast to do stuff. That's pretty good. You're going to find that this is a very solid card for that specific tempo pattern that you're going to set up and play over and over again. I don't think it's exciting, but it does its job very well. And you're going to feel that you can execute that flow constantly, because this situation always comes up where you're at one token and you can tell that the game is not going to, or this fight, this current battle, this room is not going to end in the next round or maybe even 2 rounds. And so you need to have a little bit of extra gas, which is why potential energy is a really good name for it. So I liked this card. I thought that it did something. It just isn't terribly impressive. The other thing is that you can combo this with some other stuff to do some like crazy 6 attacks if you can get additional time tokens through some other vehicles. So something to watch out for in terms of like you can set up some crazy combos, but that's not really, I think, what this card's supposed to do. I think it fills this role player position. The level 5 cards are unreasonably funny, and they are both lost cards. You do need to start watching what you're doing with lost cards, because there are some cool ones that we've talked about, and you're only a 10 card class, so you can only really afford to throw 1, 2, in the right scenario, 3 lost cards into the play. Breakneck Speed says really you only want to do 1 lost card, because what you're going to do for the next several rounds is play 3 cards instead. So you are accelerating much more quickly to your grave. You're paying 2 life every time you're doing this. You're playing 3 cards. And so your plan here is to fireball your way through this scenario. This is obviously really, really bad in any scenarios that says everybody must live at the end of the scenario. But if you don't mind being the person that exhausts by the end of the scenario, Breakneck Speed lets you do some absolutely goo goo gaga stuff. You just are 50% more powerful for 4 rounds in a row. And that's really strong. I haven't played with this card, so I can't weigh in a lot. But I think it depends a lot on your play style. I think that the harder difficulties you play enemies at, if you're particularly playing this game at like, +2 difficulty, the I burst down enemies and rush through rooms as quickly as possible is the preferred strategy, because you're going to die maybe in the long run from grinding out enemies anyway. But if you are a normal Frosthaven player, I suspect that the top of Breakneck Speed is just a little bit too weird to work for you. That being said, maybe you pick this class because you love goo goo gaga stuff, so have at. The other thing that I'll say is that the bottom of this card is incredible. A teleport 5 that you can use even when you're slow at the cost of some piddly health is incredible. I mean, the really good initiative, really good teleport, that in and of itself carries this entire card. And then when you get to the part of the scenario where like, oh, we've won this scenario, I can play some extra crazy stuff and throw a loot card while still like helping out my allies. It lets you do some really fun stuff. So I think Breakneck Speed is a very good pickup, because the bottom of this card itself is a whole card that I would use forever. That being said, you do have the tough choice against going up against Flashing Flurry. Flashing Flurry is almost always going to be an attack 4, target 2, which is just a really, really solid attack card. Or, because there's generally some element in play that you can take. One of them is ranged. Yes, it's only going to be an attack 3 if you're going slow, but if you have the slow setup for it, then you're fine anyway. It's a nice solid attack, a nice solid role player, but the exciting part of this card is certainly the bottom, where you can stun a whole bunch of enemies, get a whole bunch of extra time tokens. Remember, we just talked about the precision timing just a second ago. This is also going to be one of the only ways that you can easily set up for one of the masteries for this class. So it depends a lot on what your objectives are. I think in a vacuum, Breakneck Speed is the better choice, with a card ability that is always good, followed by a loss ability that is possibly just like very exciting as you're rounding out the scenario. But Flashing Flurry is just a nice solid attack card with another good loss on it. Honestly, both these cards are very, very good. You can't go wrong with either. If you want to be more reliable, Flashing Flurry is probably your choice. If you want to have that movement capability expanded, and then the ability to just do nut stuff, then breakneck speed maybe is for you. On the other hand, I'm not as excited about the level 6 cards. I legitimately would consider going back and taking one of the other level 5 cards. Maybe I'm undervaluing these, but let's run through them. It's not that they're bad. I just am not as like wowed by them. Knife's Edge is a fine attack. You have many better attacks. It's your one of your better attacks on the slow side at the cost of some health, which is no big deal. And if you set it up well, particularly in a big multiplayer game, you can do just an absolute gaggle of damage with Knife's Edge. My guess is that on the upside, you're probably looking at Knife's Edge being a 3-target attack that does 3 damage to you, which is pretty good. Does require setup. You're not going to be able to fire it off all the time. It's got a really clunky initiative for making that happen, so you have to pair it with something else. The bottom heal 4 is the most powerful heal that we have. I'm probably using this on the slow side because doing a heal 4 and a move 2 is not necessarily worth my fast token. But if I'm in the middle of kind of like a protracted melee with a bunch of bad guys, having that heal 4 can be very helpful as I continue slicing and dicing. And then that move 2 in the middle of that is still helpful for me to move to exactly where I need to be for my next attack on the following turn. So Knife's Edge is definitely very solid. It's just not necessarily, to me, the most exciting, except for the top when you can really trigger and do some crazy stuff. But you're probably always going to be looking for that to be set up, and it depends a lot on what your allies are doing and your player count for how good this card is going to be. Stab Them All is insanely fast. It's in our hit and run category of things where it's attack, move, attack, move. I don't think this is significantly better than our attack moves from before, but it is very good on the slow side. If you are playing that slow build that's +1 attack, this is a 3 attack, 3 attack, 2 attack. And so if you took that card at level 4, whose name I'm blanking on, Precision Timing. If you took Precision Timing at level 4, then I think Stab Them All is kind of a no-brainer pick because this just becomes an absolute powerhouse of dealing damage at that stage. Outside of that, I think that Stab Them All is just fine on the top ability, of course, paired with that nice initiative. The bottom is a little bit funky. You get somewhere, and then when enemies move to attack you, you get to attack them for 2. You're not really a tank, so you're not trying to draw enemies' attentions, but you get this ward ability if you're going on the slow side. So if you're fighting the right enemies, that's still going to be good. When you go fast, you're definitely going to be there. So you can set this up to do a fair amount of stuff. It's just a question of whether you can take the beating from the enemies after that happens. And the answer might be yes. Kind of depends again on your team comp. If you have a heavy support team comp, then actually maybe the bottom part of Stab Them All does a fair amount of work. So I can absolutely see that working. But it depends on, if you're taking this card for the top ability, you're almost never playing the bottom ability, I think. For me, round 7 is really about the slow abilities of things. So if you've got that slow build, you can see how as you're getting to the higher levels, the slow build gets, I think, a lot more exciting than it is at the lower levels. Rush to the End here is an absolute pile of damage. I actually think, ironically, you like this most when you're going slow because you got a time token and then you just spend that time token. So functionally going slow, this could be an attack 7. With essentially no real cost associated with it, whereas going fast, it's 5 with having paid the time token earlier in the turn. So Rush to the End, despite the fact that it has that green bar on there, I think is better on the slow side. Of course, if you're going fast, you can do an attack 8 if you've got everything set up, hooray, blah, 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 whatever. But I think that the slow version of this is the stronger version. And on the bottom, this is also very good on the slow side because you can yeet an ally across the battlefield and you move a little bit slower, but they move a little bit faster. And so it's basically equivalent between fast and slow in terms of party movement. And frankly, you're probably a character in the party that has the most mobility. And so giving that increased mobility to the other players that are slower in your party is probably even better. I think the slow side of this card is better on both the top and bottom for Rush to the End. So I think that's a pretty impressive card and it's going to be my pickup at level 7. The main reason is that phasing blades, adding 3 pierce to all my attacks is good in the scenarios that it's good in and just disappointing in the ones where it's not. And then the bottom is like a fine role player with a kind of cruddy initiative. They like normal move thing that's similar to my low level moves, but the ability to get some additional time tokens so that I can keep going fast if I want to go fast. I would take Rush to the End here, even if I'm not playing a slow blade type build, because on those slow turns, I still want to be doing something exciting, and Rush to the End does exactly that. Fastest Alive, we finally did it. We have a 1 initiative card that guarantees you're going to go first in a turn, so you can initiative weave and set this up for sure, which you need because the ability to attack 3 people in melee is very hard to pull off. A lot of times the monsters don't cluster like that. Again, this depends a lot on your player count. If you are playing at 4 players, you're probably going to be able to pull this off a little bit more often. Sometimes at 3 players. If you have winged boots, you're going to be more likely to pull this off because you can jump over an enemy front line where they've kind of collapsed on your fighter. Set this up as well for 3 attacks. I don't know how often you're going to be able to do 4 damage with those attacks, but it does kind of depend on what monsters you're fighting. With the revealed ability card containing no move abilities, it's kind of out of your control though, because you've set this up and decided you're playing this on the previous turn, and then you just see what the enemies do. You're not probably going to change your movement or who your targets are based on who has those move abilities, but you would know if people were stunned or immobilized or anything like that. I think there's a lot of work here. The upside is very good, but I think the work is a little bit too much for me to be impressed by the top of it. That being said, the bottom of this card is a huge amount of move for fast, like absolutely goo goo gaga, scenario changing amount of move depending on the right scenario. And the slow move being a 4 is good entirely in and of itself. So Fastest Alive is not necessarily anything that I think completely morphs your gameplay, but is going to slot in and replace one of your other cards, do some pretty nice stuff along the way there. I think the hardest thing with Fastest Alive is that my guess is that you're using this and replacing one of your cards. It's kind of like your base, 4 attack and a kind of thing. And so what you're replacing here becomes a big part of the question of whether I want Fastest Alive, because my single target ability does probably decrease if I'm taking this. Quantum Uncertainty, however, is just sort of probably an improvement over my single target enemies. If I'm fast, it's attack 5 that maybe has an upside. Most of the time, no. And if I'm slow, it's an attack 5, which is very, very good, that maybe has a downside some of the time. If I have advantage on my attack, then the both sides of this card are just better, and basically the right side of the downside of this card is irrelevant when I'm going slow. So on slow attacking builds, I can see the wallop of 5 or 6 if you're using that precision timing as being really nasty. This is what I'd pick up if I was doing that weird slow build. The bottom of this card though is pretty good, having a move and an invisibility tacked onto one ability by itself does a fair amount of stuff. And so I think that it's a very tough choice between Fastest Alive and Quantum Uncertainty if I'm focusing on the fast side of things, what I want to be doing with my turn. But it depends a lot on what card I end up replacing out, I would say, in terms of which one I'm picking at level 8. The amount of text on these cards just shows the designs for level 9 are crazy, which I love. You know that I prefer the level 9 abilities that are just so out of this world, and these do not disappoint in that regard. Fractured Timeline lets you duplicate a bad guy and have them help you out. That's a really fun minion ability. I don't know that it necessarily makes a ton of sense. Like, I guess the whole quantum, there's 2 of you sort of thing is the idea with this character. It doesn't vibe with the rest of the class. You have no real support for doing this. It's a little bit better if you have if you took the ability at level 7, the Rush to the End, that lets you let an ally move a certain number of spaces. So I think there's definitely a combo there to recognize, and that you can keep that monster moving with you for the rest of the scenario. And the right monster in the right scenario actually is just so much powerful than the other monsters when they have sort of the big kind of I shouldn't use the word elite because I don't mean the yellow base bosses, but like the bosses that there's only are the monsters that they only have 4 tokens of are generally better than the monsters that they have 10 tokens of. So if it's a scenario where you have 4 token monsters and 10 token monsters, those 4 token monsters generally going to be packing a much bigger wallop, and so you can do some pretty powerful stuff with this, and you'll know what the monsters are by the time that you are playing level 9 characters anyway, so you'll know who you want to be targeting with this. And at the bottom here is again, Goo Goo Gaga Bananas 7 teleport movement that lets you just break certain scenarios. I think not very many of them, but there's a couple of them that just become trivially easy because you can go wherever you want to. So Fractured Timeline seems like a lot of fun to me. If you're playing with other Lost cards, I don't know that you can quite take this. It sort of depends on your build, but if you're kind of playing more of the move, attack, and hit people sort of build, and you have that level 7 card that lets you move allies, then I would lean into taking Fractured Timeline just for the fun of it. Reverse the Flow also requires a sort of specific setup. I think it is absolutely spiciest with this level 8 card, Fastest Alive. So essentially what it does is it turns your movement card into an attack card. So I could use that Fastest Alive as an attack 8 with Reverse the Flow, and then you pull a card out of your discard pile as a replacement bottom card, right? So it turns your bottom card into a top card and then says, hey, use something from your discard pile as your bottom card. This is really strange. I think that it is powerful and that it lets you kind of reuse stuff, but you're not really generating additional action value here. This is just sort of allowing you to reuse the most powerful cards that you have in your discard pile for their bottom actions a second time, in addition to turning one of your other bottom actions into a fight action. I think that this is pretty good, but you definitely need to have built up towards this being your plan rather than stumbling into it. So I think it's worth considering. The lost card here is absolutely hilarious and strange. Teleport to your starting hex, 10 self-heal, recover up to 2 of your lost cards. If this is a scenario where you need to get from the beginning to the end somewhere, it's unplayable, literally unplayable. It just kills you. But if you use this in a scenario that is like a defending scenario, or, I mean, there's a huge number of scenarios where it's like the monsters are coming at you, or you kind of end up needing to like move back and forth anyway. The scenario that I had the most difficulty completing with my partner in the original game that we played multiple times would actually absolutely love having this ability, because you kind of just get to cheat because you're supposed to boomerang in that scenario, like go back to the start. So it does some really goofy stuff and absolutely, again, bust some scenarios. Both of these level 9 cards have this. And there's a really funky aspect of this class where they're just like, yeah, any of these movement scenarios this class is going to make trivially easy, which I have to imagine from a design perspective of those scenarios made them very difficult to make. And I'm not sure that I would have chosen to do that as a designer, but it is an awful lot of fun for us as players. Can't go wrong with level 9 guys, but I think it depends on the cards that you took in advance. Let's wrap up with Masteries and Perks. The Masteries here, the first one, Declare Fast for 7 consecutive rounds, is just only viable if you have the cards that let you get this and you're specifically setting up for it. You need to take the right cards when you level up. You need to use the lost cards that give you more tokens. This is definitively doable if you take all the things to do it and pick a scenario to make it happen. I think you have to probably have sufficient enemies around each other. I'm not a big fan of this mastery because I don't like ones that like are only available certainly to certain builds. The other one is hilarious though. Never be targeted by an attack is just a function of how much your party wants to deal with you trying to get a mastery in a scenario. I think this is eminently doable in any scenario where you don't have ranged enemies that target multiple units. So as long as you can sort of avoid that, you can pick the scenario where it's easiest to use and just sort of not be as helpful as you'd want to be to your allies. You'll have to be very, very cautious with your hit and runs, making sure that you are never leaving yourself open. But I think this is one of the easier masteries to complete if your party's on board to help you do it. In terms of the perks here, I think that because this is a pretty basic wall-up class, these starting perks of just removing the -2, replacing the -1 with a +1 are very, very good and are probably going to be my pickups in most games that I'm playing where I'm playing to win. That being said, there's some other really fun stuff in here. Of course, these guys that come after that add ability effects are pretty fun. I personally think that the one that adds the pin is hard to control around, because if you don't plan that you're immobilizing an enemy, you aren't necessarily going to be able to take advantage of it, but it is really powerful when it works and then you get to move afterwards. If you have these in your deck, you want to try to make sure that you're attacking before you're moving as often as possible, which is kind of fits with the hit and run style of this class anyway. But I am just more inclined to take more power rather than the other components there. The wound here, though, is kind of, if you think about it, replacing a -1 with a +1 or replacing a -1 with a 0 and a wound, the wound is actually kind of better value over time as long as that enemy doesn't have wound or healing on them, or like an ability to get healing. And so most of the time that wound thing is a little bit better than the +1 if your party doesn't generate much wound. So there's this kind of irony that if wound is not available in your party, you should move this up in your attack modifier deck. I think this one is really fun and unique, and I would choose to play with it just for that reason. It doesn't do anything right now, right? Like it's a draw another card, but it helps you plan on your next attack that you're going to be doing an additional +2 to hit on it. And I think this lets you set up some really nasty kind of like 1-2 punches. You don't know that it's coming, but you don't need to know that it's coming, because by the time that you've gained this, you say, oh, okay, on my next turn, I now can attack with greater impact, greater force. I think this is pretty cool. I think it's really fun too, and lets you kind of play a little bit with different patterns. So I'd recommend trying out this one. Replace 2+1 cards with 2+2 cards is fine, but I wouldn't do that one until later personally. I generally would prefer getting rid of my negatives first and working with some of this other stuff before turning my already good attacks into even better attacks. These add -1s to gain time token cards. Depends a lot on how you're structuring your build if you want to be going as fast as possible. Like I said, in general, going fast is +1 and going slow is -1. So having this be a -1 to gain a time token, I think doesn't get us quite as much as I would like. I haven't messed around with this very much as my own edition, but I'm not so impressed by this one. The add +2 and put yourself on rejuvenate is nice and fine. It's definitely, I mean, it's pretty painful, right? Because it's a +2 and draw another card, but the rejuvenate part of it, I'm not sure how much it comes up. And that's generally true with those rejuvenate ones. I think that it's pretty circumstantial, but the +2 and the rolling modifier itself is pretty solid. If you like rolling modifiers, it's worth going into, because I just don't like the rules around advantage and disadvantage with the rolling modifiers. I don't tend to take them as much as I did in the old game, just because I have to look at the rules every time. I find that annoying. Okay, the short rest thing is really funky here. You can use one of your long rest items to basically pick up a different spent item. I think that there are probably instances where this is really cool. I didn't try it. You need to build, I think, certainly around this. You would do this probably when you've picked up this character at later levels and started at a higher prosperity and have like the right build set to make this work. But like I said, I liked long resting so much that I kind of personally avoided this myself. The one that lets you move 3 at the beginning of the scenario, I think is actually quite good. There's a lot of scenarios where move 3 gets you right next to an enemy and you can do something like hit and run tactics. I don't know that this would be one of my first, 4 or 5 pickups. I would improve my attack modifier deck first, but then after that is kind of one of my mid pickups. I really like this one as allowing me to enact a certain sequence pretty consistently at the beginning of the scenario. The last one here, I think, is the idea that when you're pinned, you can't use your mobility aspects, but mobility is not a requirement for your class to be successful. It's a requirement for your class to live a little bit longer. But because you're an off tank, you can a lot of times afford to be pinned, take a couple hits, hit the enemies, and then run away. So I don't find this to be absolutely necessary. I kind of prefer improving my deck instead. But if you found yourself annoyed just a couple times this comes up, I could see getting rid of it. So that brings us to the end about talking about the Blinkblade. I think this is a fun class that has a lot of options and diversity to it. That being said, I don't think it's quite as intimidating as it looks like with its 5 complexity. If you think that you're pretty solid at this game compared to the other 5 complexity characters, I would rate this as closer to like a 3 or 4 complexity. It's a lot of text to take in at the beginning, but I think once you get started with it, the way that it plays and feels is going to be a lot smoother than the other 5 complexity classes in Frosthaven. Hope you enjoyed. Would love to hear your stories, comments, and suggestions as well along the way. Feel free to drop them below, and I'll keep on coming with some more stuff, but this is going to move at a much slower pace because I don't play as quickly with my family as I did with my partner. Hope you all enjoyed. Good seeing you again. Have a great day.